That's I like that one, but
Okay.
of course.
Okay. So, today I hope everybody had a good holiday, and we're in the last stretch here. And before we go into just some broader discussion and debugging with the deep learning lab, which is now pushed back a week, we're gonna just do get into Google Earth Engine and introduce. The lab is actually fairly simple. It's quite simple, but if there's a few of you who have not maybe used Google Earth Engine before, I think most of you did in the fall quarter, right? You got introduced to it, looking at different data sets. So I'll do a little bit of touch base on that. And originally I was hoping to use Python, this module, and then get into TensorFlow, next module. But the problem is that using deep learning in Google Earth Engine requires like a pricing tier that can get quickly out of hand that I haven't like figured out with admin, etc. So what we're actually going to do is instead we're going to use machine learning techniques in Google Earth Engine, particularly clustering and decision tree stuff with classification. And we're going to use the JavaScript today. And then on Monday, we'll actually use Python. And have you guys used the Collab Notebooks? Does that ring a bell? No. So that's just Google's variation of a Jupyter notebook that is they host, and it's got a few extra little fun features. So we'll go over that on Monday. So yeah, got some slides here. Okay, so with the group projects, there's now a folder for each of your group projects where all of the members in your group project that were listed in this spreadsheet have been added with right permissions. So please let me know if you don't have permissions to your group projects folder. I took the liberty of just making up short names. So we got petals, planet, rainforest, stellar, fisheries, and whales. I mean, that sounds awesome to me. I want to hear about all of these things. And then this is the corresponding directory on Taylor. And this is the user list. And if you're really interested in like Unix permissions and stuff, these are the commands used to generate that. And this is also, I call this like poor man's looping or coding. You can use Excel or Google Sheets in ways like this to quickly generate commands. And all I'm doing is concatenating different cells to then create a command that then I can run. So it's another little fun technique for you guys to explore. But in a bind, that's a quick, easy thing to do. So yeah, you should have those folders there. And go ahead and please make sure, let me know if nobody's yet in a group project. I want to make sure everybody has a group. And there is a template to start populating for introducing the Kaggle competition. And then also on Lab 4C, there's this helper R chunk. So I'm going to go over this. I'm going to go over this after we get, I'll come back to this as the introduction to like revisiting some of these concepts for doing this deep learning lab. But essentially, there's just extra R code that saves not only it shows you the 10 species that are randomly pulled from the 10,000 based on your username, but it then grabs all of the paths to all the images within each species directory, and then assigns the subset of validation, or excuse me, training, validation, or test. So you can use that list of paths to then subsequently copy into your directory and then proceed with the lab. But I'll get into that in a second, or after we talk about Google Earth Engine. So now Lab 4 is due Wednesday, March 2nd. So a week from today. Is that right? Yeah. And then the following week will be Lab 5. That's this Google Earth Engine lab. And so we've got Scott Laurie from iNaturalist and Joe Sexton from TerraPulse. So it's this is kind of cool because, you know, we're doing the deep learning on species imagery, so iNaturalist, and now we're going into satellite imagery and applying machine learning there. And Joe Sexton, I'll share biographies with these folks before they join us. But he's another buddy from Duke days who does like global forest carbon estimation and does a bunch of modeling with satellite imagery, and used to work at the Goddard Space Flight Center, NASA's Goddard, and at University of Maryland on the global land cover facility. So anyway, and then Sarah Beery, she unfortunately is going to be in Europe, but she still might join us because she's such a badass. Yeah, she's the one that was co-authoring some of the papers I mentioned last time, including the one that was just like came out a week ago about using machine learning for environment. Unavailable, unfortunately, Lucas Joppa who started Microsoft AI for Earth and is their chief sustainability officer. He's doing a stand-up meeting all day that day, so unavailable. And then Ruth Oliver is an incoming faculty at Bren who does a bunch of species imagery or species distribution modeling. She came out of the Walter Yetz lab in Yale, who's done this map of life thing that I'll actually have a link to, that has worked with Google, has a collaboration with Google Earth Engine that I'll show you in a minute. So, and if you guys like have any other ideas of people that you would like to come and share about, you know, things that are machine learning related with the whole class, I'm all ears. You know, I'd like to get a couple more folks, and I have a few in mind, but I'd also like to keep a little bit of maybe gender balance would be nice. So yeah, if you know of others, please, yeah, let me know. And I'm really behind on the grading. I really apologize. So by Monday, I promise I'll post it onto Gaucho Space. I think that's a good place to have it since you already have your midterms in there. And I have one question to regrade based on Colin's input about that question about geography versus environmental space with species distribution modeling. Okay, so Google Earth Engine. It's a cloud-based planetary scale geospatial analysis platform, and it brings massive computational capabilities, can be used for deforestation, drought, disaster, disease, food security, water management, climate monitoring, environmental protection. And it's not just for uber geek remote sensing scientists. It's aiming for a broader appeal, wider audience. And this is like the seminal paper on Google Earth Engine, and it's got well over 4,000 sightings to it. So that is an indicator of probably these subsequent papers have actually used Google Earth Engine, and they're citing this one. So it's and I'm going to pull some images from that. And you know, these data sets really start back in the beginning of the satellite record. There's over 40 whoa, sorry, this is 40, that's 40,000 terabytes. Sorry, not 40,000 gigabytes. Big difference, actually. So 40,000 petabytes. And you know, you can imagine, like, my laptop is about a terabyte, I think, of storage on it. So 40,000 laptops. But then imagine it's not just 40,000 laptops, but it's also just being able to crunch on all that data within milliseconds, which is just insane to me. I mean, yeah, the amount of work that some of these analysis that you can do now in milliseconds is like what it used to take. It's just so painful even to remember. Like I had to set up a whole server room just to do, you know, subsets of these kinds of analysis. So it's really exciting because we also need to be more responsive to environmental problems, and having access to data and computation like this really is just an absolute game changer. So I think it's really worth kind of highlighting. This is also from the paper. It's not Google Earth. Google Earth came before. It was just a viewer using a spheroid. So the Earth is a sphere. And this is an analytical machine. It's so it can analyze. There's IDEs or integrated development environments for, or excuse me, APIs, application programming interfaces for JavaScript, Python, and there's even the beginnings of one for R. And so, yeah, the extraction of this data, in this case, looks like census tracts for places of interest, and then being able to get a time series. In this case, it's this vegetation index called NDVI you guys might have encountered before. That's readily doable, and crazily, it's free. For now, at least. And these are from the paper, all these common data sets. So precipitation, temperature, visible infrared spectrums that get used for land cover, nighttime lights, weather, and like also other derived data sets about population and topography, so elevation models. And so this goes back, some of these to 79. 60. Okay, so that's world climb. 1950. Okay, that's not the satellite record, but there's some other data sets there. These are mostly raster data sets. And you can imagine that like 30 meter pixels every 16 days since 1984. That's just a lot of data to be able to crunch on. And so it's got this architecture of, you guys are going to use the Earth Engine code editor. So that's the highest level interface. Because there's an API, third parties can also develop off it. And there's also this other thing called a Google App Engine that we'll look at examples of. And so we're going to start today with the JavaScript, because there's this nice code editor that actually shows map outputs and allows you to look at files and assets, and then look at other outputs, like you're going to look at model performance. And then below that, those APIs is where now we're getting into the innards that Google manages completely of doing all this computation. And then that is sitting on top of the co-hosted data where all the fusion tables are what they use. That's a Google product for the vector stuff, the points, lines, polygons, and the tile store servers are the big the raster data sets that are generally from satellite imagery. So this little example is showing grabbing an image collection of the entire Landsat 8. And then it's saying, okay, filter over that collection for a given range of calendar dates. So the winter is going to go from November to January by month. And then this is going to go, the summer is June to August by month. And now just let's take the difference from the summer median and we'll subtract the winter median. So that's the seasonal difference for the entire Landsat collection. And it can do this like in a matter of milliseconds. It's just insane. So there's something else that this is like the it's a little bit deeper than necessary, but it's a directed acyclic graph, and this is actually what determines the sequence of computation. That and you might have seen this if you guys have you guys used Esri Model Builder? Anybody? Yeah, so that's a directed acyclic graph, and these DAGs get used throughout. And so this has to happen before this happens, before this happens, and then this process waits until these two get collected. And you'll see this with a lot of understanding like computation and sequencing. So so yeah, it's good stuff. This I thought was just a cool talk that from the CEO of Planet that is really like, well, where does this go? Like what's possible? And I like this term he coined in it called the Queryable Earth. Imagine that we can just have an assessment instantly of how many cars are on our planet that are visible from space, for instance. How many ships? How many aquaculture facilities? How many buildings? What's the solar potential of all these rooftops? So Google's actually already done a project assessing that. That is the notion of Queryable Earth. And if we're going to manage our resources responsibly, having ready access to this kind of thing is pretty cool. And these technologies are finally converging to be able to do that. I'll leave it up to you guys to watch that. Okay. And then if I did a forward reference of just what papers cited that original Google Earth Engine paper, here's an example of one. Like I just looked for a 2022 one. And it's monthly mapping of forest harvesting using dense time series of Sentinel-1 as a satellite imagery and deep learning. So, you know, we just went over some deep learning concepts, and this is using convolutional layers. It's a convolutional neural net. It has this U-shaped UNet because that's the architecture of the layers, where it starts off as being only a few nodes per layer, and then it gets denser at the bottom of the U, and then it goes back to the final prediction. But using the deep learning and on this imagery, they're able to do a pretty decent job about detecting illegal harvesting in protected areas. So that's pretty cool. This was the most cited since the GE paper as a citing paper, a forward reference. And again, just really interesting. So NO2 is associated with pollution or smog. And this is basically suggesting that, well, there seems to be actually a high correspondence of COVID associated with NO2 levels. So one can be confounding the other, but also maybe another reason why pollution is a vulnerable thing we should look out for. And you can grab this like quite quickly. I'll add a link, but I did a little analysis for looking at New Delhi using the same data set in Google Earth Engine. So yeah, and then case study app. So this Hansen example, so it was a science paper in 2013 looking at forest change globally for more than a decade. And then they did this in Google Earth Engine, and then there's a Google Earth Engine app, and you can go to that. Walter Yetz is the lead on this map of life thing that's looking at really GBIF data. So if you go this global forest cover change, this is a Google Earth Engine app, and you can zoom in and see forest loss year. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of options there, but it's pretty detailed and it's global in nature. The map of life one is, let's see, I think it picks a different species each time I click on that link, but so this is just showing polygons of distribution, and we can also look at observations from GBIF. So, and forest watch and surface water, similar. Long-term shoreline changes, that was a recent paper. So yeah, it's cool stuff. All right. So let's get into it now with the lab. So we're going to start with this, just the JavaScript, the code editor. And I'm providing links, but not going into a lot of detail. The documentation for Google Earth Engine is actually quite good. It's improved dramatically over the years. So I would suggest you go there to these links provided if you haven't already been. And this is the overview of the code editor, which uses JavaScript to interface. And for this first example, so you have to sign up if you don't already have an account. And if you do, then you can go just to this link and get going. So this first example is just doing a clustering technique. So remember last time you guys clustered on the length and width, in this case here of penguins, bills, to then help us differentiate species potentially. And in this case, the variables are bill length and bill depth, okay, in millimeters. Now, in the case of what are we clustering on here? So in this case, when we run this guy, it's clustering on the values in the bands of this raster image. So this is a composite image for 1 year of 2001 from Landsat. And it's got different bands, like red, green, blue would be different bands for a visible image. And then each of those bands is then like an axis on that previous clustering process. And so it's trying to minimize the variation to define centroids in which to assign ownership. So it's the same clustering idea as before, but in this case, it would be band 1 in intensity, band 2 in intensity, and then there would be other bands in other dimensions, but that's what it's trying to minimize the variation on when you add clusters to it. So same concept, but now we're applying it to satellite imagery. And so really the idea is that you can change, like I'm asking you in the lab just to change some So you can see the underlying, I can change the visibility of these clusters. You can see the background. And then what's crazy is like, I can just run this little chunk of code and then I zoom out and it's that same classification is now applied to the entire globe. And I can zoom back in at a really fine scale and it zooms into that original Landsat scale. So we can just like change it. And let's say we want it for 3 bands. And now we run that. And now we have 3 bands applied globally. And then I ask you to, you can use these like creation tools here. So I can create a little geometry. And let's say I really want to go to Morocco. Never been, gotta go. And I create a little geometry. And then I can call this, I can rename this even. I can call it like our region of interest coast. And then I can zoom into that coast. And let's say I want to change my region to this little polygon. Well, in the lab, you are provided just a little bit of code to be able to swap that out. And if I called it ROI coast, so here's where we define the region and then set the center. So I'm going to just replace those lines with this. So now I've got this ROI coast and I can run this. And actually, before I run that, I could save as and I'll be like live, cluster live. Okay. And so so the big picture view is on the left, we've got this scripts pane, and then we're editing in the middle. And then we're seeing that map in the bottom. And now I can run this. So now it's zoomed into the centroid of that polygon. And it's now running a classification based on that region's bands. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, so you guys, I just want you to basically create your own region, update, play with the bands, how many classifications are you asking for, and then save the images, get a little screenshot, and then just talk about the differences between like coastal and regional. So there's links to more of this stuff. There's a lot of documentation on this, but if we were just to look at this kind of generally, you'll notice that before I had this, the region was defined. Originally, the region was defined here with a rectangle of coordinates of basically latitude, longitude, corners. And then what we did was we created a geometry and then it gets loaded here. And we can see this ROI coast. And here are the vertices that I clicked on to construct that polygon. And it's in there. And now it can just be available as a variable. So you can do these imports. And even this little link, input can be converted to an import. So when I convert it, var input. So notice it just removed it from the code, but it's imported kind of on the back end. So it just means that you can import different kinds of objects that you don't have to necessarily define with code. You can upload big old shape files and that will just be available as a variable that you can then use in the rest of your script once you import it. So we can save it and yeah. Okay, so that's the clustering one. And then the supervised classification, there's two aspects to this. So one is you're going to use two different techniques. There's this cart, which is very similar to the R part, the recursive partitioning. And then there's random forest, which you guys actually already used. So remember, these were like decision trees, and we had a certain depth to the tree. And that is what's determining the supervised classification. So remember, with the unsupervised, we didn't know what the classes were. We're just saying, like, give us three of classes that basically determine the most variation. In this case, we know what the classes are. So we have training data, and we're going to fit based on the labeled or known classes. And then we're going to predict over the entire area. So we can run this and then take a look at it. So I can reset, clear the script, and just run this. And the original Google Earth Engine they have more discussion that I would like you guys to read in here, and there's more discussion with whoops, that's the wrong link. Okay, I gotta fix that. So this is supposed to be to the supervised classification, this guy. And I just added one extra line here just so you can see the training points. But this is where we had training data that was differentiating between, like, basically urban, green, and water. And then we're using those known points to then fit an R-part model. And so this is very similar to what we've done, but now just for satellite imagery, where we're taking this cart, which is like the R part, we're training it, so that's fitting the data based on known training data, and we're saying where the label is in the training data. And then we're going to take that image, and the tricky part is just understanding that here, JavaScript, like Python, is object-oriented. So we defined an image, and an image has properties. So it's this Landsat image, and it has these properties that allows us to select which bands from the image to use. And then we'll classify on those bands based on these training points that have a label. So it's kind of like, okay, we separately define the image, we define the bands, and we define the trained data. And then this is the actual fitting part. Or excuse me, sorry, this is the fitting part, the train part, and then this is the prediction part. So here we're fitting the model, and the trained is the model, and then the classify is the prediction step that's saying, okay, now that we have this relationship between the bands in the image and the classes that we're trying to predict, now predicted over the entire area. And then this is just the difference with that Google Earth Engine one, is just we're adding the points just to see where those training points were. So you guys are going to play with that. And then this next one, you're going to use random forest and actually evaluate how well did it do. So, and then you're just asked to play with a few parameters to see how that compares. So this one is just using a different decision tree that's a little bit more robust, random forest. And we're being a little bit more explicit about how we're color coding these classes rather than random. And we're also evaluating how well it does. So here we see we get a training overall accuracy and versus the validation overall accuracy. Can anybody tell me what the difference between these might be? What is that referring to if we have training accuracy versus validation accuracy?
The accuracy on the training set versus the accuracy on the test set.
Yes, or validation set. Exactly. Exactly. That's it. So there's a relationship based on the bands that we train for, and we would expect that that would be fairly high. But then the validation data set, we didn't train the model explicitly on that. And we kind of expect that to be a little bit worse. And that's exactly it. And in this case, we're getting this data from like, where is the truth that we're comparing? What is true? And we're getting this from, this is EE is Earth Engine dot, and we need to do some stuff to get some cloud-free data. And then we are getting it from this modus. So before up here, we define this modus image, and then land cover type 1. I'll be right back. And then, so that's where we get a land cover type is like truth. That's the labels of interest. And then this is now sampling 5,000 pixels from that modus land cover, which has our truth. And it's setting the seed. So you guys have set the seed before, so that we get the same samples each time we run this. And then further, let's see, validation sample. There's another sample in here. Yeah, up here. So that was the validation. And then the training data set, we get 5,000 pixels, but the seed value is different. So it's going to be a different 5,000 samples. So that's how it's doing that split. So this is just like what we had before when we were talking about this stuff. So that was the split, was getting those two different samples, in this case, the train and the validation. And then we had the fit, which was this one. They structure this one a little bit differently, but in the previous example. So here, this is setting up this classifier and then classify. So this is basically like the training it here, this whole section. And then this is the predict step here, where we take the input imagery, which is everything, and then we classify upon that with this fitted model of the classified. So, and that's basically the predict, and then we're evaluating how well we did on those two different data sets. So I think it's this code, it can get can kind of get lost in like, whoa, dissecting it. But the big picture is actually the same, in that we're taking satellite data, and rather than our predictors being something from world climb that was like topographic, something, wetness, etc., each input predictor is basically a different intensity of value for each of the satellite bands. So you could imagine that before you had a stack of your environmental predictors as a raster, and this is the same stack. It's just that that stack is just a different like red, green, blue kind of band from the satellite imagery. And it's just then running upon that. But it's doing it so that the computation and the data are both in the cloud. And we're just on this little wimpy little browser, just saying, do my bidding, and then you get global planetary analysis cha-chink. So yeah, quite cool. So you guys are just going to play with a few parameters on this just to see how does accuracy change as you maybe change the depth of the tree. So here, this little parameter is the depth of the tree. And then there's one other thing I was having you guys do, which is just changing the number of pixels in the training sample. So you're going to play with these and just report back. How does it look like these things vary as you change a couple of the parameters? And then there's more resources here to go further. So we're not doing the TensorFlow, but you can look at some of these example workflows. And these are the tiers that we haven't worked out just yet of pricing to get you guys going on. And then this is the Collab, and we'll talk about this more on Monday. So this is running on Google's servers, which is especially helpful for doing the Earth Engine stuff. And then you authenticate, and this is the Collab Notebook, which just has basically prettier outline options and theming, like this dark theme available, but it's not too different. And you can connect to different resources, including like TPUs, etc. So, okay, so any questions about this stuff? I know it's kind of a lot, just if you haven't seen Earth Engine, but hopefully there's resources here that you can reference to get you up to speed if this is your first time to Earth Engine. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Desik first. You had a question.
I think my question is on the training accuracy. Like, why is it like 0.95 versus like 100% growth using the training data to like make the model, or like basically you said about like
Right.
use delta.
Yeah. So in this case, you've got 10 branches within your decision tree that you can make that says like this value, like some threshold higher or lower than this some value, right? And then each of your input training points of those 5,000 has a different land cover class. So maybe 10 decision branches is not enough to capture the variability inherent in your training data. So what would you expect? Would this accuracy go up or down if I increase this from 10 to 20? It would go up, right? Exactly. It should get closer to 1 as we increase the depth of that tree, which could be also, there could be some overfitting that happens. And you could notice this score actually go down as you increase that tree. So it could become less generalizable to some, validation data set, but that's exactly the right question to ask. Is like, why didn't it do an even better job? How could it do a better job? And then what's the sacrifice of that? Yeah, Joe.
I may have missed this, but since we're doing our work in this, I guess, I don't know, what do you call this?
The code editor.
Code editor.
Yeah.
And just going to take screenshots. Would you want us to make those like a Word doc, Google Doc?
I will accept whatever. You'll just submit a file in this case. I think that'll be easiest. So if you just want to plop it into a Word doc or do a Google Doc and then save it as a PDF, or I don't really care.
Okay. I'm
I'm just asking really for the outputs, and then if you are changing a parameter, just indicate which parameter. There is a way to these can all go to GitHub repos actually. and there's ways to share them. That's in some of the links I shared out, but really I'm just wanting to give you guys like a taste of using machine learning in the Google Earth Engine platform. So you guys have seen Google Earth Engine, but you probably haven't, done machine learning on it. So the fact that this is possible is really what I'm trying to get you guys familiar with. Yeah.
So is this language Java? Or
This is JavaScript. So yeah, JavaScript is, I guess it's like, it's like I think it was originally conceived of as like a light version of Java, in that there's a lot of syntactic similarity to Java. And there's also some, I include some links in the lab to like some introductions to JavaScript, if you want more background on that. So there's, let's see. Yeah, I'll just show you the link. Introduction to JavaScript for Earth Engine. And you can take each of these examples and just run them directly within this little environment. So I can run this. Whenever you're printing something, it goes out to the console, the hello world, just to show that, actually this is just, it's like your web browser, all the interactive things that happen on your web browser are actually in JavaScript. So I think it's actually a really useful thing to know about. And, if I go in and I want to like inspect this page, so I could look at this and I inspect, and this is Google Chrome's little HTML. So I'm like looking at this, but there's a console. And because this has no dependencies, I could just copy this and run this on the console. And this is JavaScript. Whoa, it's printing something. Oh, it's actually trying to print. Okay, so yeah, it's not the same. I think I would say, what is this? Message? No. Well, alert is going to do a little pop-up. So, hello world. Yeah. So I think that's also more reasoning to provide some familiarity to JavaScript, is just that basically all the cool visualizations that are happening with data are pretty much JavaScript and web enabled. Have you guys used anything from D3? Is that? No. Okay, that's a good one. But yeah, so in this example, this introduction, so that's just the hello world, and it's a little specific. Some of the commands are specific, but the syntax of you don't use the pound character for a comment. It's //. You're supposed to end every statement with a semicolon. And then here's how you define lists, which is more like Python versus like the C parentheses. Quoted strings, and then you can define these objects or these dictionaries with the curly braces, which is also more like Python. But it uses, to define a function in Python, it's space, you do a colon and then you indent to define a function. And in JavaScript, it's very similar to R in that you use the parentheses for the arguments and then the curly braces for the content of the expressions you want to run within that function. So yeah, we already got through it all. Yeah, see, easy, you guys know it. It's just syntactic difference, so it's conceptually similar to what you guys have been doing. So yeah. Yeah, other questions or comments about Earth Engine? Yeah, it's pretty, yeah.
considering categorical versus continuous data.
Mm.
Clustering occurs in two different types of data.
Hmm.
Like I believe that land types would be categorical.
Right. Ding ding. Yep.
So like how does clustering work like on land types versus like other types of continuous data when you're looking at the graph?
Other types of continuous data like.
Well, I was just kind of considering like the last slide,
Mhm.
the map, like you were talking about, that's like
Mhm.
two continuous variables and X and Y.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're trying to consider like land type, and that's
Mhm.
categorical, and you're using the same analogy of using like the maximum axis for clustering, what is the difference between how the clustering works on the community data versus?
Okay. This is there's a common slip up here in differentiating the predictors from the response. So when we're looking at that penguin example, this is actually the response in this case is categorical, but the but the predictors are continuous. So this bill depth can be a continuous value of distance as well as the bill length, but then it's either a chin strap, a Gentoo, or an Adelaide. And so that's a categorical. Now in this, what I confused you guys before doing this, because I just said, just after I think I said unsupervised learning, we don't have a response term. And then I'm like showing you response data. So if we were naive about the response, we didn't know that these were different species, we could just cluster and see like, is it similar to knowing what the species are? And in this case, the response here is, this is a categorical, but the input is continuous. So the analogy here is that each band is really a measure of intensity. We tend to encode intensity values. Like, our eyeballs have, our eyeballs measure the electromagnetic spectrum with in the visible range with cone cells that measure red, green, and blue. And we tend to encode the intensity as some value that's like a factor of 2, because we live in a binary compute world. So usually it's like 0 to 256. So if we have the red band, this axis might be 0 to 256. And then the red, blue, and then blue band, this would be 0 to 256. And you can imagine a green one going 0 to 256. And so each then pixel is somewhere in that 3D space, right? And that is then defines a color. And if we want to say, okay, this color is, I'm going to associate this off gray as like a intense urban environment. This is urban. And then this blue, this like turquoise blue, okay, that is water. And this deep green, that is forest. So those 3 pixels that I just described show up on that red, green, blue axes. And we can say like that is the centroid of what we're clustering on. And pixels that are close in color range to that centroid are then going to be assigned membership to urban, forest, or water. So that's what's happening with the clustering. And it's actually very similar with the supervised classification. So we called the clustering unsupervised because we didn't tell it what the classes were. We're just trying to figure out like, okay, if I wanted three classes that maximize the different, the that minimize the variation described between distances of all these centroids. And then the supervised classification is saying, okay, here is some truth. Here are these classes. Here's where urban is, here's where water is, and here's where forest is. I want you to figure out, I don't know where on the color scales, based on the bands of the data I have, where that falls. But I can tell you, this is the pixel. So now I can tell you where those bands are when I sample that point. And here's the label for it. So now you learn, I've supervised the learning of this random forest now by giving it labels with the training data set. And then it samples those underlying bands as the predictors, and then it fits that relationship. So yeah, that'd be good if I should get a red, green, blue little color cube, and you guys can just click on points and you can see where it shows up and distances. That would be cool, but you can imagine it. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That was a good question. Yeah. Okay. Well, guys, we only have 15 minutes left, and I want to go back over the deep learning lab because it was kind of heavy duty. There's a lot going on there. So let's switch gears and talk about that. So you might notice if you click around, I didn't update all the pages with the nav. I have to regenerate each one each time the site menu changes. But you can always go back to the main course website, and all the labs will be listed on the main page. So if we go back to this iNaturalist deep learning one, I just added some code. So before, where we left off was, I'm just wanting everybody to get 10 unique species, and this was just a little trick to get your username and then get some numeric value uniquely based on your username, and then set the seed before we do a sample. So that as long as that set seed gets run every time just before a sample, then you'll get the same 10 rows back. So this is a vector of 1 to the number of species, however many directories we have, which is actually 10,000, we already know, and this is giving you 10, so I10. So there was 2 types of classification problems that were presented in the deep learning with R or deep learning with Python. The simplest is a binary classification, just like, is the species present or absent from the very first lab, or is it a dog or a cat? And then a slightly more complex version is the multi-class, like, was it one of these 10 species? So I'm kind of asking you guys to just chew on both, because it brings home, like, what are the layers about, and how do you input them, and then how do you output them? And the input layer needs to match the shape of your input data, and then the output, so the images, and then the output needs to match the shape of your labels. So that's where the trick is. And does it? You responded perfectly on Slack to basically, I think, suggest as much. Yep. So that's where the real trick is. And then it's mostly just borrowing. Now, I don't want you guys to get bogged down in the all of this file organization. So I just created a little bit of a helper script to get you to the stage where everything is already now classified. So in my case, for my username, I have these 10 species. So there's an ID, and then it goes like kingdom, phylum, class, whatever, family, genus, species. So full taxonomic hierarchy there. And I guess I got 9 plants and 1 animal. And then, so that's the multi-class problem, is to differentiate between these 10 labels. And the binary classification problem, I'm just asking you to take the first 2. So some of you actually approached me after I shared this lab and were like, well, what about running it in Python? This is in R. And rather than, trying to replicate that set, the integer sampling converter thing, you can just run this chunk. And then the idea is that you can save a CSV and then read that in. So in Python, you could use pandas to read the CSV, or in R, you could use the read_CSV. But what this, I'm just going to walk through what this guy is doing, which is, okay, first, if we get the species label, you can get the base name is just like strips off the prefix of like courses EDS 232, and it just gives you just the directory name. And then we're going to take all 10,000 and just get the 10 we want. And then there's 2 Boolean columns that are added here. One is the species 10. So this is the 10 species multi-class problem. And then this is the 2 species binary problem. And the first 2 are true, the rest are false. These are all true, so not very interesting, but just to highlight, you've got these 2 different data sets that you'll be using. And then this is like, I just think this is so cool how, like our, they created a data frame years ago, and like the fact that you could store different types of data in the same table was like mind-blowing 30 years ago. And the innovation, I would say, in like similarly within the last few years is this notion of a list column, which is each cell can actually contain any object. So it can contain a ggplot object, it can contain a whole other table, actually. And so what's happening here is what we can take that directory, and then we can reconstruct the full path to it. So now we're taking the original table up above, and we've got this species column, and then we run per map. So have you guys used per? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So can you tell me what type of object I get back when I just use per map? If I use per map and I do _CHR, what kind of data type do I get back? Character. Yeah. If I do per map without any suffix, I actually get back a list object. So because I'm using tibbles, I can store a list object in a column. I can use a list column. And a tibble itself is a list object. So this is actually per cell, it's creating a table of, or tibble of images. And so for given it's the species, we want to list all the files, excuse me, given a directory of species, we want to list all the files in that directory. So we're going to create a little tibble just for that species directory of image. So that's going to list the files. And then we're going to, because we know there's 50 files in that directory, we can repeat the word train 30 times, the word validation 10 times, and the word test 10 times. And now we've got a vector of 50. So that's going to match this vector of 50. So that's going to be a character. This will be a character. We have a little tibble. And so I guess I should run this on Taylor. Let's see if I can log in. So you can see what that looks like. Actually, yeah. Okay. Okay, so this is the little table, the simple one. And then if I look at this and I just run this guy here before I unnest, what you'll notice is that here, this is a list. So this is logical, true, false, character, and then list. So this is a tibble, and I can look at, let's say I just assign D to just that before I unnest. And if I look at tibble images, and I can look at just that first one, and that's the tibble. So this is, we have 50 rows, 2 columns, image and subset. So that's the file within. And actually, I should have written the prefix, but it's in there. So so if we look at this D now, and we look at what unnest does, is it goes from like this guy, this D is just 10. So we have 10 species. And then in each species has 50 images. And then when we unnest, we have 500 rows. We went from 10 rows to 500 rows. And by unnesting, we basically repeated everything that wasn't inside that list column, and then brought it out of that little list column. So now I can just write this out. So now the upshot is that when you do the table, this table is really, it should be called tabulate, because it's not a table. It's tabulating how many. In this case, I had to truncate the species name. And so it's saying that, okay, for each of our 10 species, we have 10 test images, 30 train images, and 10 validation images. So this is just a summary of the CSV that gets written out, which is, if you read it back in, you get this. So you can just basically have dir species and image. That's the full path to each image. And we have, here's the label, and here's the subset. So there was another section of the labs, which with the dogs and cats, or excuse me. Oops. So with this guy, there was this whole section about here, where we've got the test and train for different categories. And then here it creates it. I didn't actually run this, but it copies it over. And so you need to have write access to where you're going to run this stuff, because you need to be able to generate the images on the fly. And so this original data set directory would be analogous to where the unnaturalist images are. And then this base directory would be where you have write permissions and then want to copy all those images into and set it up so that it can run off of that. So there's other ways we could, automate the 10 species. That's kind of a lot to do individually, but it's a start. So I don't know. Do you guys have questions about that before we field other kind of aspects? Yeah, Jeff.
Okay.
All right, that's it.
Oh, I was asking like whether if we have all 10 of the species there, like before we start doing the binary, will it be like, will it mess it up because the binary only looks for 2 folders? Because when we specify in code, we just say train directory, so it would look at like all of the subdirectories, right? The 10 species, they're there.
Right, yeah. Yeah, at some point you have to tell it which things are labeled. Like it's basically, you're really needing to feed 2 aspects for every image. One is, what is the label on that image? And then the second one is it in the training, validation, or test kind of subset? And then depending on how many labels you have, that's what is going to determine how you define those, the final output layers, and whether it's like that multi-class or not. So there's one slide that the text is really good about going into more detail about this, but I pointed out this slide last time. I just want to point out one more time, because it talks about this layer differentiation. Yeah, so the last layer. So, and depending on the number of, so the binary classification, you want to use this guy for your last layer, sync point. So that, remember, it's like that logit function, because it clamps it between two values, like a 0 and a 1. And then the multi-class, you also want the sigmoid, and then this loss function. This also gets defined based on the type. Yeah. Did I answer what you were asking about?
Yeah, kind of. And I mean,
Or maybe do you want to
maybe
rephrase?
kind of one, yeah, actually. The example uses categorical cross-entity and softmax for the multi-class.
The category. So for the
Like the example you told us to pull from.
right, so the dog versus cat uses the single label, uses this guy.
The dog versus cat wasn't multi-class. The
Right.
multi-class one you gave us was,
Oh yeah, the MNIST.
yeah, and I think,
Yeah.
I think that one
So this guy,
softmax.
and yeah, E uses softmax. Okay,
So
let's
we
see.
can change that.
Oh, okay. Yep. Let's see. What is, so these are both multi-class. What is multi-class multi-label versus multi-class single label?
Like if I don't know, say your labels were dog, cat, black, brown, or like one photo could have multiple labels to it.
Uh-huh. Oh, right. Thank you. Okay, so this would be, you can have more than, yeah, I should know this, right? Yeah, so this is maybe more than one label could be assigned to the same image.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And this is, yeah, only one label per image. So that is, thank you. That is all we are doing, is the softmax. Yeah. We're not dealing with multiple labels per image. Yeah. Thank you. That's the winner. Well, this should be, I mean, I just said multi-class in the lab, but there's a difference between, the example is MNIST. So given an image of a digit, it's trying to predict. So the example given was 0 to 9. Is it 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9? And it's only predicting one label
Right.
for an image. Whereas let's say you have a whole, a zoo, images of zoos, then you might have dogs and cats in the same image. That'd be a multi-label. So the example referenced is softmax and categorical cross entropy. So we were just reminding ourselves of the differentiation between what this means. Yeah. So the example used that. So that's should keep that. Yeah.
Keep the single label.
Yeah.
Because it's just differentiating between two species.
Yeah. Because we're not like assuming that we're trying to figure out all the different species in a given image with the iNaturalist. We're assuming that is a single image for a single species. There might be other things in the background. Even with the dog example, there's actually a pet alligator in one of the images, but it's not saying alligator and dog. It's just saying this image, dog. Yeah. But there's other problems that do the multi-label. Yeah. So actually, like if you, pretty much every smartphone now, Apple does this, Google does this with Android, Apple with iPhone. If you search your photos, you can search by like boat and it'll pull up all your boat photos. And it's doing exactly this. So that's a multi-label classification because multiple things are being assigned to the single image. Yeah.
Can you go back to making the right directory? So I understand that we make the CSV that has all these file types, images that are now labeled or designated, train, test, validate. But I'm a bit confused as to how we actually get the files, like make that path to writing files into our Taylor folder.
Yeah. Okay. So
And
here,
how do you keep that separate to use a binary versus the multi-class?
yeah. So here, this is analogous. That's what I was pointing to this guy, is that there's an original data set part, which would be the folder path under the courses. Now, you guys don't have write access to that courses folder. So the base dir in your case would be where you have write access to. And now the idea is that you would this file path sets up your where you're going to copy things from and to. And then here you're creating the destinations. And then here's the actual file copy commands. So I linked alternatively to the Python version of this. And all the Python notebooks have been updated to actually work on Taylor with, I think, all the fixes. So this is how you copy files from the, so this is the source, the first argument, and then the destination, the next argument. So all we're doing is subsetting here the path. And so you've been provided a table with all those paths. So you then can just feed it paths of all your, like, for that given training data set, you can feed that in there. So it's the file copy command in R. And then if we look at this 5.2 in the IPython notebook. So I forked, there was actually a first edition folder I hadn't noticed before. And so I forked that and then I updated all these to make sure that they run. So you'll see that I commented this part out so that you guys can just run this. And it's not going to try to make stuff where, because I basically already created this. I should have set this to your tilde folder, but and then that would have run. But this is the core code. And so in this case, the function is a little different, right? It's copy file source destination. So they set it up a little differently, but it's the same idea. And we're using the copy file function. So we can also like, this is a little redundant. We could streamline this. Maybe I'll just do that so that, because it's like, it's really annoying. They say that there's a slide I love to show with data science in general. Maybe I used it last quarter, but there was a clip from a New York Times piece about data scientists spending 70 to 80% of their time just like doing like really mundane tasks, like figuring out how to copy files and organize things. And janitorial work is what they called it, I think, in the headline. And this is janitorial work. And it's generally where you do spend the majority of your time, but it's not where I want you guys to be spending your time. I'd love for you guys to know how to do it, but it's not a great use of our collective effort. Yeah, so I'll just like work up a little script after class. By the end of today, I'll have a Python version and an R version for just getting all the folders, all the images copied into the right folder. So you guys don't spend, I kind of wanted you to like take a crack at it, but it's really not that fun. Yeah, so let's move on so you guys can actually focus on defining the layers, just like the cognitive like hurdle, and then getting your predictions back. So yeah, so I'll do that.
So from this point on is when we resize the images once we have them in our folder.
Exactly.
And then,
yeah.
And then we can actually.
Yeah. And so this is also tricky in that the dogs versus cats, the images were of different sizes, and use this image like generator to help resize everything so that everything goes in and the shapes of the layers are okay. But the MNIST example that I referenced, it doesn't do that because all the original images are already pre-sized. So it's kind of this like mashup. And I think it's actually a really good exercise to try to like blend two different examples with slightly different approaches and figure out how they work. Because I mean, mostly, how we figure stuff out is we hit a problem or an error code or something. We Google it, we end up on Stack Overflow, we copy somebody else's example, we kind of like mash it up with something we already know how to do, and we get to solution, and that's how we problem solve. So this is kind of asking you to do some of that. Yeah.
I wanted to make sure I had the workflow in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly the right question. So, and I'm just realizing I'm looking at all those lines and just like, oh, it's really annoying if you have to do this 10 times. So let's not have you do that. Yeah. Yeah.
So just to clarify, like the part where you made the table, that was just to get the file path.
Exactly. Thank you. Yep. Just to get the file paths and just to allocate the label and the training versus validation versus test.
Okay, and this is the part that gets the images.
And this exactly. This is the part that gets the images into your writable folder. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna write that part. End it today. You guys come in to an inbox near you, so you don't have to spend your days doing janitorial work. You didn't come to grad school to do janitorial work, did you? Yeah.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah. Thank you. Great questions. All right. Oh no.
Yeah. So he said.
Oh. I don't know when it stopped recording. How did that happen? I joined the meeting and then.
That's not enough to get. And even
Oh, Lordy. Oh, no.
Now it's just.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, it's not bad. I guess I just like have no idea what it entails. Yeah, no. Yeah. So I'm like, should I wait? Yeah. I know.
What?
And my other stuff. Well,